Eleanor, did you at least bring a card? Or is showing up empty-handed your idea of supporting family? My mother's voice cut through the low hum of the restaurant like a blade. Patricia David, 61 years old, impeccably dressed, and loud enough that the couple 2 tables over glanced up from their wine. I sat at the far end of the table, my hands folded in my lap, watching the red bow on the BMW key fob catch the light. It sat there on the white tablecloth like a trophy. My brother Marcus grinned, 20 years old today, while my father Richard clapped him on the shoulder with the kind of pride I'd stopped hoping for years ago. The question hung in the air. I felt every eye in that private dining room turn toward me. My throat tightened, but I didn't answer. I'd learned a long time ago that silence was safer than defense. Patricia didn't wait. She turned back to Marcus, her voice warm and sweet. "This is just the beginning, sweetheart. We have so much more planned for you." My name is Eleanor David. I'm 32 years old. I'm a senior financial analyst at a mid-sized investment firm in Seattle. I have a modest apartment in Capitol Hill, a career I built entirely alone, and a life my parents have never once asked about. I've spent most of my adult life trying to understand why nothing I do will ever be enough for them. Marcus dropped out of college twice. He still lives at home. He's never held a job for more than 6 months. And tonight, they handed him a luxury car like it was nothing. I paid my own way through graduate school while working 2 jobs. I haven't asked them for a dollar since I was 18. And my mother just asked if I brought a card. I stopped expecting fairness years ago. But watching them hand him those keys while questioning my empty hands cracked something inside me I didn't know was still intact. The dinner continued. Champagne flowed. Laughter filled the room. None of it included me. Patricia leaned back in her chair, swirling her wine. You know, some people prioritize career over family. It's a choice, I suppose. Her eyes flicked to me, just for a second. Just long enough. Richard chuckled, cutting into his steak. Eleanor probably forgot about the party entirely. Too busy with spreadsheets, right? Marcus laughed. His girlfriend sitting beside him laughed too. I didn't know her name. I'd never been introduced. Then Marcus turned to me, his face flushed with alcohol and attention. "Hey, Eleanor, is your company hiring? I'm thinking about trying the corporate thing. You know, see what it's like." The irony wasn't lost on me. He wanted an entry point into the world I built alone, handed to him, as casually as the car keys. I excused myself. My chair scraped against the floor. No one looked up. I walked to the bathroom, locked the door, and stood in front of the mirror. My reflection stared back. Calm, composed, professional. I breathed slowly, forcing down the familiar ache of being erased in my own family. I counted to 10, then 20. Then I unlocked the door and walked back. When I returned to the table, dessert had been served. My seat was gone. Marcus's girlfriend sat there now, laughing at something Richard said. She looked up, saw me standing, and smiled apologetically. "Oh, sorry, I didn't think you were coming back." I didn't respond. I stood at the edge of the celebration, watching my family toast to Marcus's future, watching them laugh, watching them exist in a world that had no space for me. And I realized, with sudden and absolute clarity, that I'd been cast as the supporting character in a story that was never about me. The dinner ended. The bill was paid. We moved to the parking lot, where the BMW gleamed under the streetlights like something out of a commercial. Patricia pulled out her phone. "Everyone gather around the car. We need pictures." They clustered together, Marcus in the center, Richard's arm around his shoulder, Patricia beaming, the girlfriend tucked in beside them. Then my mother turned to me. "Eleanor, you can take the picture for us." She held out her phone. I took it. I framed the shot. My smiling family, the gleaming car, the perfect moment, and something inside me went completely, irrevocably cold. I drove home in my 7-year-old Honda Civic, the one I bought used after saving for 2 years, the one I was proud of because I earned it myself. The streets were quiet. My hands were steady on the wheel. My breathing was even. But my mind wouldn't stop. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even sad. I felt numb, like I was watching my life from somewhere outside my body. Every red light gave me time to think. Every turn brought another memory I'd buried. Christmas mornings where Marcus unwrapped the expensive electronics while I got practical things. Socks, a planner, a gift card to the grocery store. My college graduation where I sat in the audience alone because they were busy with Marcus's baseball game. He was 12. My first promotion to senior analyst. I called to tell them. My mother said, "That's nice, dear," and then spent 20 minutes talking about Marcus getting hired part-time at his friend's startup. They celebrated that like he'd been appointed CEO of a Fortune 500 company. I kept driving. The city lights blurred past my windows. Was I being oversensitive? Had I imagined the disparity? No, I hadn't imagined anything. I'd just been trained to accept it. I pulled into my apartment complex at 10:30. The building was quiet. I climbed the stairs to the second floor and unlocked my door. My apartment was small, one bedroom, modest, but it was mine, entirely mine. I decorated it carefully over the years. Minimalist furniture, bookshelves filled with novels and financial journals, a few pieces of art I'd collected from local galleries. It was neat, organized, a reflection of the life I'd built alone. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the window. The city stretched out below me, thousands of lights in the darkness. I hadn't dated seriously in 3 years. My closest relationships were with colleagues, people I respected, people who respected me back. I'd built a life of careful independence because depending on people, especially family, had only ever led to disappointment. I thought about calling Sarah, my best friend since graduate school. She'd listen. She'd be outraged on my behalf. But I didn't want to say the words out loud yet. I didn't want to hear myself explain why a birthday dinner hurt so much. Instead, I opened my laptop. I scrolled through social media, Facebook first, then Instagram, post after post about Marcus's birthday, the BMW gleaming in every photo, my parents beaming, Marcus grinning, his girlfriend laughing, the restaurant, the cake, the champagne. Not a single photo included me. Not one caption mentioned my presence. I scrolled further back. Months of posts, family dinners, weekend trips, holidays. I wasn't in any of them. I'd been erased so completely that even the digital record pretended I didn't exist. I closed the laptop. My wine sat untouched on the table. At 11:47, my phone buzzed. A text from Patricia. "Thanks for coming tonight. Next time, maybe put in a little more effort? Marcus noticed you didn't bring a gift. It hurt his feelings." I read it once, then again, then a third time. Each word landed like a small detonation in my chest. My hands began to shake. My vision blurred. Something that had been compressed inside me for 3 decades suddenly demanded space. I typed a response, deleted it, typed another, deleted that too. 5 different versions, each one angrier than the last. Finally, I wrote, "I'll keep that in mind." I hit send. Then I turned off my phone. I sat in the dark, staring at the city lights, and felt something shift inside me. This wasn't about one dinner. It wasn't about one car or one forgotten gift. It was about the systematic erasure of my worth, the casual cruelty of being tolerated rather than loved, the exhausting performance of pretending it didn't matter. I'd spent 32 years trying to earn a place in my own family. And tonight, holding that phone, taking that picture, I finally understood. I was never going to earn it, because they didn't see me as someone who deserved a place. They saw me as the person who held the camera. I made a decision then. I didn't fully understand it yet, but I felt its weight. I wouldn't respond with anger. I wouldn't beg for recognition. I wouldn't explain or defend or justify. I would simply stop participating in my own diminishment. If I was invisible to them, then I'd disappear completely. And we'd see what happens when the ghost they created finally leaves the room. I woke up the next morning with unusual clarity. The sun came through my bedroom window the same way it always did. I made coffee, I worked out, I showered, I got ready for work. But something fundamental had shifted. I didn't check my phone for family messages. I didn't rehearse potential conversations in my head. I didn't carry that familiar weight of anticipating the next flight. At work, James stopped by my desk around 10. He's a colleague I've known for 4 years. Quiet, observant. "You seem different today," he said. "More focused." I looked up from my spreadsheet. "Do I?" "Yeah, in a good way." I realized he was right. I felt sharper, more present, almost lighter, despite the heaviness of what had prompted the change. I'd been splitting my emotional energy for so long, managing my family's perception of me, being available for their occasional needs, hoping the next interaction might be different. Without that drain, I had space to breathe. Over the next several days, my phone accumulated messages. Patricia sent a photo of Marcus standing beside the BMW. The caption read, "So grateful for family." I stared at that exclamation point for a long time. Richard forwarded an article about investment strategies. No personal message, just the link. Marcus texted on day 3. "Hey, do you know anyone hiring in finance? Could use a connection." I read each message, processed it, then continued with my day. This wasn't active punishment. It wasn't dramatic silence. It was simply the absence of my usual immediate accommodation. I didn't explain my lack of response because that would require engaging with the system that devalued me. Instead, I focused on my work. I took on a challenging new project, analyzing potential acquisitions. I stayed late 2 nights in a row, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. And I scheduled dinner with Sarah. We met at a small Italian place on Thursday evening. Sarah ordered wine. I ordered pasta. She knew immediately that something had changed. "Tell me," she said. So I did. I told her about the birthday dinner, the BMW, the photograph, my mother's text. Sarah is a therapist. She's known me since college. She listened without interrupting, her expression growing more serious with each detail. When I finished, she set down her fork. "Eleanor, what you're describing isn't a family dynamic. It's systematic emotional neglect with a side of scapegoating." The words hit me like cold water. "You've mentioned patterns over the years," she continued. "They call only when they need something. Your achievements get minimized while Marcus's mediocrity gets celebrated. You've been conditioned to believe that asking for equal treatment is being demanding." I felt tears on my face before I realized I was crying. Not from fresh pain, from relief. Someone had named what I'd been living with. "What do you want to do?" Sarah asked gently. "I don't know yet," I said. "But I'm done pretending everything is fine." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You've been the family's emotional ATM for 30 years, she said. "Maybe it's time to close the account and see who actually notices the person, not just the service." I walked home slowly that night, thinking about everything Sarah had said. I thought about all the times I'd rearranged my schedule for family events, the times I'd covered Marcus's loans that were never repaid, the hours I'd spent listening to my mother's complaints about stress while my own struggles went unmentioned. I did rough math in my head. Over the past decade, I'd given my family over $40,000. Graduation gifts, emergency funds, Marcus's car insurance, contributions to family vacations. I was then criticized for not enjoying enough. The money itself didn't anger me as much as what it represented. My constant audition for a role I was never going to get. I thought about the BMW, probably worth $60,000, given casually to Marcus while I was questioned about not bringing a card. The mathematics of my own devaluation became impossible to ignore. On day 6 of my silence, my father called. I stared at his name on the screen. My thumb hovered over the answer button. For the first time in my life, I let it go to voicemail. When I listened later, his message was brief and irritated. "Eleanor, your mother is worried because you're not responding. Call us back. This silent treatment is childish." I saved the message, not out of sentimentality, but because something about his tone crystallized my resolve. The assumption that my silence was a tantrum rather than a boundary. The complete inability to consider that my absence might be permanent. They'd never had to consider me at all. My phone rang at 6:30 on a Saturday morning. 2 weeks into my silence, Patricia's name lit up the screen. I almost didn't answer, but something in the early hour made me pick up. Eleanor, you need to come home today. Her voice carried an edge of panic I'd never heard before. It's about your grandmother's estate. The lawyer needs all of us present. I sat up in bed. My grandmother Helen had passed away 8 months ago. I'd been told the estate was simple, everything handled. What is this about? I asked. Just come. 1 p.m. Don't make this difficult. The call ended before I could ask more questions. I sat on the edge of my bed, processing the sudden summons. 2 weeks without my compliance had apparently created enough disruption to warrant an emergency meeting. I thought about my grandmother. Helen was the only family member who ever saw me, who asked about my life, who remembered my birthday without being reminded. That made me hesitate. I spent the morning preparing, but not in my usual way. I didn't rehearse explanations or apologies. Instead, I dressed in my most professional outfit, a tailored navy suit I wear for important client meetings. I wanted to look like someone who couldn't be pushed around. Then I reviewed my own financial documents. I've always been meticulous about family finances. I keep records of every loan, every gift, every contribution I've made over the years. I never intended to use this information as leverage. But I'm a planner. I document details others overlook. I printed out a summary, $43,000 I'd given my family over the past decade, itemized by date and purpose. I didn't know if I'd need it, but having it made me feel prepared rather than ambushed. Before leaving, I texted Sarah, going to parents' house for a state meeting. If you don't hear from me by 5 p.m., assume I've been guilt-tripped into another decade of service. She replied immediately, stay strong, call if you need an exit strategy. I arrived at my childhood home exactly at 1 p.m. The house is a large colonial in an expensive suburb, purchased when Richard's business was thriving, maintained through his income, and probably some of the money I contributed for family emergencies. Marcus's BMW sat prominently in the driveway. I parked on the street and walked to the front door. The lawn was manicured, the porch furniture expensive, visual markers of success my family has always prioritized. Patricia opened the door before I could knock. Her expression was tight with controlled anger. You're late, she said. I was precisely on time. Inside, the family was assembled in the formal living room. Richard in his leather armchair, Marcus on the couch looking confused and slightly hungover, and a man in his 50s wearing a suit, presumably the lawyer. The atmosphere was tense. I understood immediately that whatever this meeting was about, it wasn't what they'd told me. The lawyer stood and extended his hand. Miss David, I'm Mr. Peterson. Thank you for coming. He addressed my parents, but kept glancing at me with something like sympathy. He began outlining the basics of Helen's estate. Her house was sold, her possessions distributed, her accounts settled. I nodded, wondering why this required a family meeting. Then Mr. Peterson paused. He adjusted his glasses. However, there was one provision in Mrs. Helen David's will that I was instructed to disclose only after a specific waiting period, which ended last week. The room went silent. Patricia leaned forward. Richard's jaw tightened. Marcus looked between everyone, trying to understand the significance. Mr. Peterson opened a folder and removed a document. Mrs. David established a trust fund 28 years ago, shortly after her granddaughter Eleanor was born. The fund has been growing privately. Per her instructions, Eleanor was to be informed of its existence only after she turned 30 and demonstrated financial independence. He looked at me directly, which my firm verified through your employment records and credit history. I felt the room's energy shift, felt my parents' attention sharpen into something predatory. Mr. Peterson continued, the trust is currently valued at approximately $340,000. It transfers to Eleanor immediately upon signing these documents. The number hung in the air like a detonation. My mind raced, but my face remained calm. Patricia's voice cut through the silence, sharp, accusatory. That's impossible. Mother never mentioned any trust. She would have told us. Mr. Peterson's response was professional, but pointed. Mrs. David was quite specific about confidentiality. She wanted to ensure the funds went to Eleanor without interference. I watched my mother's face transform. saw the calculation behind her eyes, and I understood with perfect clarity why I'd been summoned today. They didn't know about the trust until recently, and now they needed my cooperation, or my compliance, to access what they believed should be family money. Mr. Peterson slid the documents across the coffee table toward me. Before I could reach for them, Richard spoke. Now, Eleanor, before you sign anything, we need to discuss this as a family. His tone was the one he uses in business negotiations. Measured, authoritative. Your grandmother clearly intended this money to benefit the family, not just one person. We should talk about how to distribute it fairly. A strange calm settled over me, the kind that comes when a suspicion is confirmed so perfectly that there's almost relief in it. I looked at my father, then at my mother. Patricia's expression had shifted from anger to something like strategic sweetness. Sweetheart, you know how much we've supported you over the years. This money could help all of us. Marcus is trying to start his career, and we have expenses. She trailed off, leaving the implication hanging. I noticed Marcus wouldn't meet my eyes. He was uncomfortable, but not uncomfortable enough to object. For the first time in 2 weeks, I spoke to my family directly. Grandmother didn't leave this money to the family. She left it to me. The simplicity of that statement created a ripple of tension. Richard's expression hardened. Don't be selfish, Eleanor. Family means sharing, means supporting each other. The irony wasn't lost on me. This from the man who just bought his son a BMW while questioning his daughter about a birthday card. I turned to Mr. Peterson. Are there any conditions on this trust? Any requirements for how I use the money? He shook his head. None. Mrs. David specified only that you be the sole beneficiary and that you use it as you see fit. She included a personal letter for you as well. He handed me a sealed envelope, my grandmother's handwriting on the front. Patricia reached for it. I pulled it back, tucked it into my purse. The gesture was small, but definitive. The room registered the shift. Then came the pressure campaign. Patricia pivoted to guilt. Your grandmother would be so disappointed to see you being selfish with her legacy. Richard added financial logic. You're doing fine on your own. Marcus needs help getting started. This money could change his life. Marcus finally spoke. His voice carried a whine I recognized from childhood. Come on, Elle, it's not like you need it. You're always talking about how stable your job is. 2 weeks ago, these arguments would have worked. I'd been conditioned to prioritize everyone's needs above my own. My family's financial irresponsibility had always been framed as my responsibility to fix. I thought about the $43,000 I'd given them, the BMW, the birthday humiliation, 32 years of being the family's emotional and financial safety net while being treated like an afterthought. The anger I'd been holding returned, not hot and explosive, cold and clarifying. I stood. The movement silenced everyone. I looked at Mr. Peterson. I'd like to sign the documents now. He began arranging the papers. Patricia's voice rose. Eleanor Marie David, if you do this, if you take this money without sharing it with your family, you'll regret it. You'll be proving that you only care about yourself. The use of my full name, the tone of maternal authority. It would have worked on the Eleanor of 3 weeks ago. But something had fundamentally changed. I signed each document carefully, my hands steady, while my family watched in stunned silence. When I finished, Mr. Peterson explained the transfer process. The money would be in my account within 3 business days. He handed me a second envelope, information about additional assets, some of Helen's jewelry, a few paintings, the contents of a storage unit, everything designated specifically for me. I gathered the documents and found myself wondering if other people have experienced this. The moment when you realize that protecting yourself looks like selfishness to people who benefited from your self-sacrifice. The question felt important, almost universal, like something that might resonate beyond this room, beyond this family, with anyone who's ever been made to feel guilty for having boundaries. I thanked Mr. Peterson and walked toward the door. Behind me, Patricia's voice cracked with genuine emotion for the first time. If you leave with that money, don't bother coming back. You're choosing to destroy this family. I paused at the threshold, my hand on the doorknob. I turned back. My family was frozen. My mother standing with tears in her eyes. My father's face red with suppressed rage. Marcus looking between everyone like he was watching a car accident. My response was quiet, almost gentle. I'm not destroying anything, Mom. I'm just finally stopping pretending that I was ever really part of it. I walked out, closed the door softly behind me, and didn't look back. I sat in my car for several minutes before starting the engine. My hands gripped the steering wheel. My breathing was deliberately slow. I could feel the adrenaline leaving my body. My hands began to shake slightly. My eyes burned with tears I wouldn't let fall until I was safely home. I drove carefully, mechanically, through suburban streets that suddenly felt foreign, like I was seeing them for the first time without the filter of obligation. When I reached my apartment, I deadbolted the door behind me, dropped my purse on the counter, stood in the middle of my living room, trying to process what just happened. The trust fund felt surreal, but more surreal was the fact that I'd walked out, that I'd said no, that I'd chosen myself for the first time in my adult life. I poured myself a glass of water and sat at my small dining table. My grandmother's letter sat in front of me. The envelope was cream-colored, expensive stationery that Helen always used for important correspondence. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. I was careful not to tear the paper. This was the last thing she'd ever say to me. The letter was dated 3 years before her death, written in her elegant cursive. I began reading. My dearest Eleanor, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And you've just learned about the trust I established for you. I imagine your parents are not pleased. Let me explain why I did this and why I kept it secret. I had to pause, breathe. When you were born, I saw something in your eyes, a brightness, a determination, an independence that reminded me of myself at your age. I also saw how your parents looked at you and later at your brother, and I recognized a pattern I knew too well. The tears came then, quiet and steady. Favoritism isn't always loud or obvious. Sometimes it's quiet, systematic, the slow erosion of one child's worth to elevate another's. I watched them do this to you for years, and it broke my heart. She had seen it, all of it. The letter continued. Helen described things I thought I'd imagined. How Patricia had always been competitive with other women, including her own daughter. How Richard had wanted a son first, and never quite forgave me for being born female. How Marcus was coddled because he reminded them of themselves, while I was overlooked because I was different, more capable, less needy. She wrote about trying to intervene, about arguments with Patricia, about being told she was interfering. She wrote about the decision to create the trust secretly, to give me something that couldn't be taken, diluted, or shared against my will. I read through tears that blurred the words. Then came the final section. Eleanor, by the time you read this, you'll be over 30, financially independent, and probably exhausted from years of trying to earn love that should have been freely given. I laughed through my tears. She knew me so well. This money isn't just financial security. It's permission. Permission to stop trying. Permission to build a life that doesn't include people who make you feel invisible. Permission to understand that walking away from family isn't failure. Sometimes it's survival. I pressed my hand to my mouth. Use this money however you want, but use it for yourself. Don't let them guilt you into sharing it. Don't let them convince you that boundaries are selfishness. You owe them nothing, my darling girl. You never did. The words landed like absolution. I love you. I always saw you. I'm so proud of who you've become despite them. Not because of them. Live freely, love yourself. And remember that sometimes the family you choose is more real than the family you're born into. With all my love, Grandma Helen. I folded the letter carefully and held it against my chest, crying quietly in my empty apartment. The validation was overwhelming. The grief was real. But underneath both was something new. Permission to stop fighting for a place at a table that was never set for me. My phone buzzed. Then again, then continuously. Patricia, Richard, Marcus, all demanding responses, explanations, apologies. I silenced my phone. I placed my grandmother's letter in a frame on my bookshelf, right where I could see it every day. And I made a decision that felt both terrifying and liberating. I was going to disappear from their lives completely. I was going to use my grandmother's gift to build something entirely my own. Over the next 48 hours, my family launched a coordinated campaign to regain control. Patricia called 17 times. I watched my phone light up with her name over and over. The voicemails ranged from tearful guilt trips to angry accusations. Eleanor, how can you do this to your own mother? You're tearing this family apart over money. I didn't raise you to be this selfish. Richard sent formal emails about family obligations and legal considerations. He hinted vaguely at contesting the trust, though Mr. Peterson had already assured me the documents were airtight. Marcus texted asking if we could meet alone. He claimed he wanted to understand my perspective, but his messages ended with questions about a business opportunity he needed funding for. I read everything, but I responded to nothing, and my silence seemed to enrage them more than any argument could. I wasn't triumphant. I wasn't even angry anymore. I felt strangely calm, like I was watching a storm from inside a shelter I'd built myself. On the third day, the extended family began reaching out. Aunt Carol called, Patricia's sister, a woman I'd spoken to maybe 5 times in the past decade, always at family events, always superficially. Eleanor, I'm concerned about your recent behavior, she said. I think you're going through something. You should reconsider your actions before damaging family relationships permanently. The sudden concern was transparent. Patricia had clearly recruited allies. Next came a Facebook message from my cousin Jennifer, someone I barely knew. I'm so disappointed that you would hurt Uncle Richard and Aunt Patricia like this. Your grandmother wouldn't have wanted the family torn apart. The audacity of distant relatives suddenly having opinions about money they had no claim to would be funny if it weren't so predictable. Blocked Carol's number. Ignored Jennifer's message. I marveled at how quickly family loyalty mobilized when money was involved. But it was nowhere to be found during 30 years of me being overlooked. Then Patricia took to social media. She posted vague but pointed messages about betrayal, selfishness, what family really means. She shared quotes about forgiveness and loyalty, accompanied by old photos of Marcus and me as children, carefully curated to present a narrative of a once happy family torn apart by one person's greed. I watched this unfold from my private account. Friends and distant relatives commented with supportive messages to Patricia. They had no context for what actually happened. My mother was a master of public perception. She'd always controlled the family narrative. And my silence in the face of this campaign might look like guilt to people who didn't know the truth. For a moment, I considered responding publicly, setting the record straight. But then I remembered my grandmother's letter. You owe them nothing. I didn't need to win a public relations battle. I needed to build my own life. On Saturday morning, 1 week after the trust meeting, my doorbell rang at 8 a.m. I was in my pajamas drinking coffee. The unexpected sound made me freeze. Through the peephole, I saw Marcus standing in the hallway, looking disheveled and uncomfortable. He was alone. I'd expected Patricia to show up eventually, but not Marcus unsupervised. I debated not answering, but curiosity won. I opened the door but didn't invite him in. He started immediately. Elle, we need to talk. Can I come in? His tone was pleading. I recognized the little brother voice he'd always used to get what he wanted. I crossed my arms and stayed in the doorway. Talk here. He looked around the hallway nervously. Look, I know Mom and Dad came on too strong about the money. That was wrong. But I'm in a really bad situation and I need help. I owe some people money, and if I don't pay them back soon, I'm going to lose everything. The speech felt rehearsed. How much do you owe? I asked. Marcus hesitated. 35,000. I made some bad investments and I borrowed from the wrong people to cover it. And there it was. This was why they needed my trust money so badly. This wasn't about fairness or family. It was about using my inheritance to bail out Marcus's irresponsibility. Do Mom and Dad know? I asked. Marcus nodded miserably. They've been trying to fix it, but they don't have that kind of cash available. When we found out about your trust, it seemed like He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Like the perfect solution, I completed, my voice flat. Use my inheritance to clean up your mess. Marcus looked genuinely distressed. For a moment, I felt the old familiar pull to fix things, to rescue him like I always had. But then I remembered the BMW, the birthday humiliation, the 32 years of being invisible until they needed something. I looked at my brother, really looked at him. I didn't see the golden child my parents created. I saw a 20-year-old man who'd never faced real consequences, never learned to solve his own problems, never had to because there was always someone else to bail him out. I thought about how my parents spent $60,000 on his car, while he owed $35,000 to dangerous people. Their priorities had always been image over substance. When I finally spoke, my voice was gentle but immovable. Marcus, I'm not giving you money. Not now. Not ever. You need to figure this out yourself. His face crumpled. He started to argue, but I stepped back and began closing the door. Wait, he said desperately. What am I supposed to do? I paused. My response was the most honest thing I'd ever said to him. The same thing I've been doing my entire life. Figure it out alone. I closed the door softly and turned the deadbolt. I heard him stand in the hallway for several long minutes before finally leaving. After Marcus left, I experienced something unexpected. Not guilt, grief. I wasn't grieving the family I had. I was grieving the family I'd never have. The parents who would never see me. The brother who would never value me beyond what I could provide. I sat on my couch, wrapped in a blanket, and allowed myself to fully feel the loss of something I never actually possessed. This wasn't the dramatic grief of sudden death. It was the slow, aching grief of accepting a truth I'd resisted for decades. My family doesn't love me the way I love them. They probably never will. And continuing to hope otherwise was only hurting me. I cried, deep, body-shaking sobs that felt like releasing years of accumulated disappointment. When I finished, I felt emptied out, but strangely lighter, like I'd finally put down a weight I'd been carrying since childhood. That evening, Sarah showed up unannounced with Thai food and wine. I hadn't told her about the trust meeting details, but Sarah has a therapist's intuition for when someone needs company. Over dinner, I told her the whole story. The trust, the family pressure, Marcus's visit, my decision to refuse help. Sarah listened without interrupting. When I finished, her response was characteristically direct. You know this is going to get worse before it gets better, right? They're going to escalate because you're not following the script. I nodded. I understood. The question is, Sarah continued, what do you want your life to look like on the other side of this? Not in relation to them, just for you. The question stopped me cold. I realized I'd never thought about my life that way. Never imagined a future that wasn't somehow entangled with my family's needs and expectations. Over wine, Sarah and I began sketching possibilities. The trust money wasn't life-changing wealth, but it was freedom. Freedom to take risks, to make choices based on what I wanted rather than what I could afford. I admitted I'd always wanted to travel, but never felt I could justify the expense. I'd thought about switching to a smaller firm where I'd have more autonomy but less security. I'd considered buying property, but always talked myself out of it. Sarah pointed out a pattern. You've spent your entire adult life playing it safe, staying small, being responsible. Partly because you had to, but partly because being successful and happy might have made their neglect harder to excuse. She leaned forward. You've been making yourself smaller to make their treatment of you seem less cruel. What if you stopped? What if you took up all the space you're entitled to and let them deal with their own discomfort? That night, after Sarah left, I sat at my laptop and began making concrete plans. I opened a spreadsheet and started listing everything I'd wanted but postponed. A 2-week trip to Italy, a down payment on a condo, a career move to a boutique firm that had been trying to recruit me. Maybe even going back to school for a specialized certification I was interested in. The exhilaration was strange, planning a life that was entirely mine. That didn't factor in anyone else's needs or opinions. I made another list. Boundaries I needed to establish. No more loans to family. No more attending events where I was treated as an afterthought. No more accepting criticism disguised as concern. No more explaining or justifying my choices. The act of writing these boundaries felt radical, almost rebellious, like I was claiming territory that had been occupied by other people's expectations for too long. At 11 p.m., I did something I'd never done before. I sent an email to my parents and Marcus for documentation. The email was brief, professional, final. I've made my decision regarding Grandma Helen's trust, and it's not up for discussion or negotiation. I'm taking a step back from family interactions for the foreseeable future. This isn't punishment, it's self-preservation. I need space to build a life that's mine, and I need to do it without the constant pressure to justify my choices or subsidize yours. I wish you well, but I'm done participating in dynamics that diminish me. Please respect my boundaries and don't contact me unless there's a genuine emergency. Eleanor. I read it 3 times. My finger hovered over the send button. I felt the weight of what this represented. Not anger, not revenge, but the quiet, definitive act of choosing myself. I clicked send, closed my laptop, and went to bed. I slept more deeply than I had in months. The next morning, I woke to 43 missed calls, 62 text messages, and a voicemail from my father that began, "Eleanor, I don't know what's gotten into you, but this stops now. You will call me back today and apologize for that disrespectful email, or there will be consequences." The threat hung in the air. My family had never accepted a boundary from me before. They didn't know how to respond to my refusal to engage, so they were escalating to intimidation. I listened to the entire voicemail, saved it, and then I did something that felt both terrifying and empowering. I blocked all their numbers. The silence that followed was immediate and profound. I understood that I just crossed a line I could never uncross. There was no going back now. The first week of complete silence from my family was disorienting. I found myself reaching for my phone habitually, expecting messages that didn't come because I'd blocked them. Years of being on call for family emergencies had created patterns that didn't disappear overnight. Managing my mother's emotional needs, being available for Marcus's requests. The neural pathways were still there. I'd catch myself feeling anxious at random moments. Then I'd remember I'd chosen this. The absence of their demands was a gift, not a loss. Work became easier. I wasn't distracted by family drama anymore. My apartment felt more peaceful. I started sleeping better, eating better, noticing small pleasures I'd overlooked before. Morning light through my window, the satisfaction of a completed project, the quiet joy of an evening with no obligations. On day 9, I received a call from Victoria Chen. She was the managing partner at Meridian Financial, the boutique firm that had been courting me for 6 months. Victoria was direct. "Eleanor, we want you. We're prepared to offer you a senior position with a 20% salary increase, equity stake, and the autonomy to build your own client portfolio. I know you've been hesitant, but I'm asking you to seriously consider what you want your career to look like in 5 years." The old Eleanor would have found reasons to say no, would have prioritized security over opportunity, would have worried about what failure might look like. But I wasn't the old Eleanor anymore. I found myself asking different questions. What do I actually want? What would I do if I weren't afraid? The conversation ended with me asking for a week to consider. But I already knew my answer. I was going to take the risk. That evening, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "About your family situation." My first instinct was to delete it. Another flying monkey, probably. But something made me open it. The sender was Daniel Morrison, Marcus's best friend from high school, someone I hadn't thought about in years. The email was apologetic and revealing. "Eleanor, I heard about what happened with the trust fund through Marcus. I want you to know that some of us see what's going on and it's not okay. I've watched your family treat you like a second-class citizen for years, and I've watched Marcus take advantage of your generosity without ever appreciating it. I kept reading. I'm writing because I think you should know that Marcus's debt situation is worse than he told you. He doesn't owe money to dangerous people. He owes it to his girlfriend's father, who owns a car dealership and gave Marcus a loan for a failed crypto investment. Your parents know this. They're using the dangerous people story to manipulate you. I thought you deserved to know the truth. I read the email 3 times. Anger crystallized into something colder, more clarifying. They hadn't just asked me to bail out Marcus. They'd lied to manipulate me into doing it. The dangerous people story was designed to trigger my protective instincts, to make me feel responsible for my brother's safety. It was calculated emotional manipulation, and it almost worked. I thought about Marcus standing in my hallway, looking genuinely distressed. Even his performance had been orchestrated. My family didn't just take me for granted. They actively strategized about how to exploit me. The betrayal felt different than the years of neglect. It was active, intentional, proof that they saw me clearly enough to manipulate me, but not clearly enough to value me. I responded to Daniel's email with simple gratitude. Then I forwarded the exchange to Sarah with a single line. I think I've been playing checkers while they've been playing chess. Time to flip the board. I spent the next 2 days researching and planning. I created a detailed document outlining every financial transaction with my family over the past decade, every loan that wasn't repaid, every emergency that turned out to be optional, every contribution I made to family events and expenses. The total was higher than I thought, $47,300. I wasn't planning to demand repayment. I knew that money was gone, but I wanted the record clear. I wanted the evidence of my generosity documented against their narrative of my selfishness. I also researched my legal position regarding the trust, confirming it was ironclad, that my grandmother's will was properly executed, that my parents had no legal claim to the money. Knowledge became armor. I found myself feeling not angry, but strategically calm, like a general surveying a battlefield. I finally understood. As I reviewed my documentation, I found myself wondering about the psychology of families who create scapegoats, whether they genuinely don't see the imbalance, or whether seeing it would require them to confront their own cruelty. The question felt important, like understanding the answer might be the key to finally letting go. On the 10th day of silence, my doorbell rang at 7 p.m. I checked the peephole. Patricia stood in the hallway, alone, holding what appeared to be a casserole dish. My mother looked smaller than I remembered, older, almost vulnerable. For a moment, I felt the familiar pull of guilt, the ingrained response to her needs. She rang the bell again, then knocked softly. Eleanor, honey, I know you're home. I brought your favorite dinner. Can we please just talk? The voice was gentle, pleading, stripped of the anger from the voicemails. It was a different tactic. I recognized it immediately. If intimidation doesn't work, try love bombing. I stood frozen on the other side of the door, my hand hovering near the lock, facing the most difficult test yet. Could I hold my boundary when my mother was being kind? I stood at the door for 30 seconds that felt like 30 minutes, listening to my mother's voice through the wood, feeling the weight of 3 decades of conditioning telling me to open the door, to be kind, to give Patricia another chance. But I thought about the BMW, the trust manipulation, the dangerous people lie, the years of systematic invisibility. I thought about my grandmother's letter. You owe them nothing. I took a deep breath and called through the door, my voice steady. Mom, I'm not opening the door. If you want to talk, we can do it through the door or you can leave. The silence that followed was thick with shock. Patricia wasn't used to closed doors, wasn't used to me setting terms. When she spoke again, her voice had an edge. Eleanor, this is ridiculous. I'm your mother. Open the door. What followed was a conversation both absurd and profound. Two adults talking through a locked door, one trying to regain control, the other holding a boundary for the first time. Patricia cycled through tactics. Guilt. After everything I've done for you. Martyrdom. I've been crying for days. Manipulation. Your father's health is suffering from this stress. And finally, anger. You're being incredibly selfish and immature. I responded minimally, letting her words reveal themselves. I wasn't enjoying this. I wasn't feeling triumphant. But I also wasn't wavering. Each of her arguments landed differently now. I could see the patterns. I could hear the manipulation that had always been there, but that I'd been trained to interpret as love. Finally, she asked, "What do you want from us?" My answer was simple and devastating. "Nothing. That's the point. I don't want anything from you anymore." Patricia's response was immediate and sharp. "So you're just going to take your grandmother's money and abandon your family?" I stood in my apartment with my hand pressed against the door, and I found myself finally saying the things I'd thought for years, but never voiced. "That money was never family money, Mom. Grandma left it to me specifically because she saw how you treated me. She saw the favoritism, the neglect, the way you've always made me feel invisible unless you needed something." I paused. "And you know what the saddest part is? You're proving her right. You didn't come here to repair our relationship. You came here to get access to that money. Even now, even after everything, you can't see me as anything other than a resource." The words came out calm, factual. Patricia's response confirmed their accuracy. "That's not fair. We've always loved you. We've always been there for you." I'd been holding my phone. Now I opened the document I'd prepared, the financial record of my family contributions. I began reading through the door. March 2019. I gave you $2,000 for your emergency dental work that turned out to be cosmetic veneers. July 2020. I loaned Marcus $3,500 for car repairs that he used to go to Vegas with his friends. December 2021. I contributed $5,000 to the family vacation fund, and then was criticized for not seeming happy enough on the trip. I continued, my voice level, reading date after date, amount after amount, while my mother stood silent on the other side of the door. When I finished, I said, "That's $47,300 over 10 years, Mom. None of it repaid, all of it expected. And 2 weeks ago, you questioned whether I brought a card to Marcus's birthday party, where you gave him a $60,000 car." I took a breath. "So no, you haven't always been there for me. I've always been there for you. And I'm done." The silence that followed was long and heavy. When Patricia finally spoke, her voice was different, smaller, almost broken. "Is that really how you see us? As people who used you?" I felt both empowered and exhausted. "I see you as people who loved Marcus more and never thought I'd notice. I see you as parents who celebrated his mediocrity and ignored my achievements. I see you as a family who made me feel like I had to earn a place at the table and then move the table every time I got close." My voice stayed steady. "I don't think you meant to be cruel. I think you just never thought about me enough to realize you were being cruel, and that somehow hurts more." Patricia tried one more approach. "If you feel this way, then we can work on it. We can go to family therapy, we can change. Just don't shut us out completely." It was the closest thing to accountability she'd offered, but I recognized it for what it was. Not genuine change, damage control. "Mom, I'm not shutting you out. I'm stepping back to figure out who I am without constantly managing your expectations and Marcus's needs. If you actually want a relationship with me someday, it has to be one where I'm valued for who I am, not what I can provide." I continued carefully. "That means no more asking for money, no more guilt trips about family obligation, no more comparing me to Marcus or making me feel less than. If you can do that, maybe we can talk in the future. But right now, I need space." Patricia's response was immediate and revealing. "So you'll consider a relationship if we meet your demands?" "That's not how family works, Eleanor." And I realized she still didn't understand. She was framing boundaries as demands, respect as negotiation. The relationship she wanted was the one where I had no power. and that relationship was over. I heard her pick up the casserole dish and walk away. Her footsteps echoed in the hallway. I waited until the sound faded. Then I slid down to sit with my back against the door, emotionally exhausted, but somehow more solid than I'd ever felt. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, one of my parents' devices I hadn't blocked yet. I opened it. A message from Richard. Your mother is devastated. I hope you're proud of yourself. You've destroyed this family over money. Don't bother coming to us when you need something. You're on your own. I read it twice. Then I screenshot it for my records. I typed a single response. I've always been on my own. I'm just finally okay with it. I hit send, blocked the number, and sat in the quiet of my apartment. The worst had happened. My family had rejected me. And I was still standing. I was more than standing. I was free. The next morning, I woke to discover that Patricia had posted on Facebook a long emotional status about the pain of having an ungrateful child, about sacrificing everything for your children, only to be abandoned, about money destroying families. The post was vague enough to maintain plausible deniability, but clear enough that anyone who knew the family would understand it was about me. The comment section filled with supportive messages for Patricia, friends and distant relatives offering sympathy, sharing their own stories of ungrateful children. I read through it, feeling a strange detachment. I was watching my mother craft a public narrative that erased my 32 years of being overlooked, that framed my boundary as abandonment, that positioned Patricia as the victim of my cruelty. The old Eleanor would have panicked, would have felt compelled to set the record straight, to defend herself publicly. The new Eleanor simply screenshot the post for documentation and closed the app. Over coffee that afternoon, I showed Sarah the Facebook post. She read it, then looked at me with professional calm. You know what this is, right? This is an extinction burst. When a behavior pattern stops working, it gets worse before it gets better. She's trying to force you back into the old dynamic by creating public pressure. Sarah paused. The question is, can you tolerate being misunderstood by people who don't matter? I sat with that question. Most of the people commenting on Patricia's post were acquaintances, distant relatives, my parents' friends, people who had never been close to me, who had never asked about my life, who didn't actually know me. Their opinions were based on a narrative crafted by my mother, and I understood that trying to correct that narrative would require engaging with the very system I was trying to leave. I think I can, I said slowly. It's uncomfortable, but it's less uncomfortable than going back. On Monday, I accepted the position at Meridian Financial. The conversation with Victoria was energizing. We discussed my vision for my client portfolio, the specialized certifications I wanted to pursue, the kind of work that had always interested me but that I'd never had the autonomy to explore. Victoria mentioned that I seemed different, more confident, and I realized it was true. Removing the constant drain of family obligation had freed up mental and emotional energy I didn't know I was spending. I gave notice at my current firm. My manager was disappointed to lose me, but he commented that he'd never seen me so certain about a decision. The 2-week transition period felt symbolic. I was leaving behind not just a job, but an entire version of myself that played small to avoid threatening my family's narrative about who I was supposed to be. I began receiving private messages from people I didn't expect. A former colleague who saw Patricia's post and reached out to say she'd always thought my family didn't appreciate me. A high school friend who shared her own story of cutting off toxic family members. Daniel Morrison, Marcus's friend, who sent articles about family scapegoating and golden child dynamics. The messages weren't numerous, but they were meaningful. Each one validated my experience, reminded me that I wasn't crazy, wasn't cruel, wasn't wrong. I realized I wasn't alone in this experience, that family estrangement was more common than people admitted, that there was a whole community of people who'd had to choose between their family's comfort and their own well-being. The solidarity was unexpected and deeply comforting. I met with a financial advisor to discuss the trust fund. Together, we created a comprehensive plan: $50,000 for a down payment on a condo, $30,000 in an emergency fund, 100,000 invested conservatively for long-term growth, 60,000 for the Italy trip I'd always wanted, and the professional certifications I needed for my new role, and 100,000 kept liquid for opportunities and flexibility. The advisor commented that my approach was unusually thoughtful and balanced. I realized it was because I wasn't spending the money reactively or emotionally. I was using it intentionally to build a life that reflected my values and goals. The meeting ended with me feeling something I'd rarely experienced: excited about my future, optimistic about possibilities, untethered from obligations that had nothing to do with my actual life. That evening, I received an email from Marcus. The subject line read, "I'm sorry." I stared at it for several minutes before opening it, my finger hovering over the delete button, knowing that whatever was inside would either be genuine or another manipulation. I clicked. The email was longer than I expected. I've been thinking about everything that happened, and I need to apologize. Not because Mom and Dad told me to. They'd kill me if they knew I was writing this. But because I've been a terrible brother. You've always been there for me, and I've never appreciated it. I've never even thought about what it must have been like for you, watching them treat us so differently. I kept reading. I don't expect you to forgive me or give me money or fix my problems. I just wanted you to know that I see it now, and I'm sorry. I'm going to figure out my debt situation on my own. It's going to suck, but it's my responsibility. I hope someday we can have a real relationship, one where I'm not just taking from you, but I understand if that's not possible. You deserve better than what we've given you. Marcus. I read the email 3 times, searching for manipulation, for hidden requests, for the catch, but it read sincere, and I found myself crying, not from sadness, but from the unexpected gift of being seen by the person I least expected to see me. 3 weeks into my new life, I received a certified letter from Mr. Peterson, my grandmother's estate lawyer. The letter was brief but intriguing. Ms. David, while reviewing final estate documents, I discovered additional materials that your grandmother left with instructions to provide to you if certain circumstances arose. Based on recent events and inquiries I've received, I believe these circumstances have been met. Please contact my office to schedule an appointment. I called immediately, curiosity overriding caution. Mr. Peterson's assistant scheduled me for the next afternoon. What additional materials could my grandmother have left? Why would they be contingent on circumstances? What inquiries had Mr. Peterson received? The questions occupied my thoughts through the workday, through dinner, through a restless night where I dreamed of my grandmother's house, and woke feeling both anxious and strangely hopeful. Mr. Peterson's office was elegant and old-fashioned, filled with leather-bound books and darkwood furniture. He greeted me warmly and gestured to a chair across from his desk. "Your grandmother was a remarkable woman," he began, "and she was very clear about wanting to protect you. What I'm about to show you was sealed with instructions that it'd only be opened if your family contested the trust, or if you faced significant harassment regarding the inheritance." He slid a manila folder across the desk. Inside were documents I didn't immediately understand: financial records, letters, what appeared to be a private investigator's report. Mr. Peterson explained, 3 years before her death, your grandmother hired someone to document your family's financial situation. She wanted to understand where the money she'd given your parents over the years had actually gone. I began reading, and the documents painted a devastating picture. My grandmother had given my parents substantial financial gifts over 2 decades: help with the house down payment, funds for Richard's business, money for emergencies, totaling nearly $400,000. The investigator's report tracked how that money was spent: luxury vacations, Marcus's private school tuition, the country club membership, Patricia's shopping habits, Richard's expensive hobbies. Meanwhile, my college education, which I'd always been told the family couldn't afford to help with, had overlapped with a $50,000 renovation of their kitchen. The documentation was meticulous and damning, showing a pattern of financial prioritization that excluded me completely while maintaining an appearance of upper-middle-class success. I felt not surprised exactly. but the painful validation of suspicions I'd always dismissed as paranoia or jealousy. The folder also contained letters between Helen and Patricia, correspondence I never knew existed. In them, Helen repeatedly offered to help with my education, to set up a college fund, to provide support. Patricia's responses were consistent. "We're handling it. Eleanor is independent and doesn't need help. We're focusing our resources on Marcus, who needs more support." Reading my mother's words, seeing the deliberate choice to exclude me, I felt something shift. This wasn't neglect born of oversight or unconscious favoritism. It was active, intentional, documented. My mother had turned down help specifically meant for me and redirected family resources to Marcus, all while telling me there simply wasn't money available. The betrayal was comprehensive. I sat in Mr. Peterson's office, holding these letters, understanding that my entire childhood narrative was a construction designed to justify my parents' choices. Mr. Peterson explained that Helen had intended these documents as protection. "Your grandmother suspected that your parents might try to claim you owed them financial support, or that the trust should be shared as repayment for their sacrifices. She wanted you to have evidence that they received substantial family money that they chose not to use for your benefit." He paused. "She also wanted you to know that the inequity you experienced wasn't in your imagination. It was real. It was documented. And it wasn't your fault." He handed me a sealed envelope with my name in Helen's handwriting. Inside was a single page. "Dearest Eleanor, if you're reading this, they've likely tried to make you feel guilty for keeping what's yours. Don't let them. You owe them nothing, not gratitude, not money, not continued participation in a family system that never valued you. These documents are your shield. Use them if you need to, or simply keep them as proof that you're not crazy, not cruel, not wrong. You're the sanest one in the family. I love you. Be free. Grandma." I left Mr. Peterson's office with the folder tucked in my bag, feeling like I was carrying proof of a crime I'd always suspected but could never prove. I sat in my car in the parking garage, hands shaking. My grandmother didn't just give me money, she gave me the truth, documented and undeniable. For the first time, I had leverage, evidence, the ability to defend myself against my family's narrative. The question was, what would I do with it? My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "How did the meeting go?" I stared at the message, then typed. "My grandmother left me a nuclear option. I'm not sure if I should use it or just knowing I have it is enough." I hit send and sat in the silence of the parking garage, holding the power to expose my family's hypocrisy, wondering if revenge was what I actually wanted, or if peace was enough. For 3 days, I carried the folder everywhere, unable to decide what to do with it. Part of me wanted to scan every document and post it publicly, to respond to my mother's Facebook narrative with irrefutable evidence of who actually destroyed the family. I imagined the satisfaction of watching my parents' carefully constructed image crumble, of seeing the people who supported Patricia's victim story realize they'd been manipulated. I drafted multiple versions of a post, each one more detailed than the last, each one perfectly worded to expose the truth without seeming vindictive. But each time I was about to hit send, I hesitated. Sarah's words echoed in my mind. "Revenge feels good in the moment, but peace feels good forever. Which one do you actually want?" I scheduled an emergency session with my own therapist, Dr. Martinez. I'd been seeing her sporadically for 2 years. I brought the folder and explained everything: the trust, the family response, the documents my grandmother left. Dr. Martinez listened carefully, then asked a simple question. "What would using this information get you?" I thought about it. Vindication, proof that I'm not crazy, public acknowledgement of what they did. Dr. Martinez nodded. "And what would it cost you?" I considered. My peace, my forward momentum, probably years of continued engagement with people who don't actually care about the truth. The therapist let the silence sit. Then she added, "Eleanor, you've spent 32 years trying to get your family to see you. These documents prove you were right to feel unseen. But the question isn't whether you can prove it. The question is whether you still need them to admit it. Walking home from therapy, I had a moment of clarity. It felt almost physical, like something clicking into place. I didn't need my parents to admit they were wrong. I didn't need public vindication. I didn't need the people who supported my mother's narrative to apologize. What I needed was to build a life so fulfilling that their opinion of me became irrelevant. The documents my grandmother left weren't weapons. They were a gift of a different kind. They were proof that my experience was real, that I wasn't defective or overly sensitive or imagining slights that didn't exist. That proof was valuable not because it could hurt my family, but because it could free me from ever doubting my own perception again. I was shifting from seeking external validation to trusting internal truth, from wanting revenge to choosing peace, from needing to be right to simply being done. That evening, I took the folder to a safety deposit box at my bank and locked it away. I didn't destroy it. I might need it someday if my family escalated legally, or if future circumstances required proof of the past. But I didn't weaponize it either. Instead, I wrote a brief email to my parents, sent from a new email address they wouldn't have blocked. I recently learned some things about family finances and decisions made regarding my education and support. I'm not interested in discussing them or in public confrontation. I'm simply letting you know that I have documentation of everything, should I ever need it. I hope I never do. This is the last communication you'll receive from me unless circumstances change significantly. I wish you well, but I'm moving forward with my own life. Eleanor. I sent it, then immediately added their email addresses to my spam filter. The message wasn't a threat. It was a boundary with teeth, a quiet assertion that I knew the truth and wouldn't be gaslit about it anymore. 2 hours later, I received a response from Marcus's email. Elle, I saw the email you sent Mom and Dad. They're freaking out. I don't know what documentation you have, but I think I can guess. For what it's worth, I'm glad you have it. I'm glad Grandma protected you. I kept reading. I meant what I said in my last email. I'm working on being better. I got a real job, not in finance, just at a warehouse. But it's honest work and I'm paying down my debt myself. I don't expect you to care, but I wanted you to know. I'm not asking for a relationship or forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that someone in this family is trying to do better. Take care of yourself. M. I read the email 3 times, feeling something unexpected. Hope. Not hope that my family would change entirely. Not hope for reconciliation on their terms, but hope that maybe, someday, Marcus and I might build something honest. Something that didn't require me to be small for him to feel big. That night, I dreamed of my grandmother's house. In the dream, Helen was sitting in her garden, and I was young again, maybe 10 years old. She said, "You know what the best revenge is, sweetheart? Living well, living freely, living like the opinions of small-minded people don't matter, because they don't." I woke with tears on my face. But they weren't sad tears. They were the tears of finally letting go. I got up, made coffee, opened my laptop to research condos in the neighborhood I'd always loved. I was done looking back. It was time to build forward. 6 weeks after the trust meeting, my life looked remarkably different. I was thriving at Meridian Financial. My insights and client relationships were already generating results that exceeded Victoria's expectations. I'd enrolled in a certification program for sustainable investment strategies, a specialization that had always interested me but that my previous firm didn't support. I'd put an offer on a condo in Fremont, a neighborhood with tree-lined streets and a vibrant community feel. The offer had been accepted. I chose the space based solely on what I wanted, not what was practical or affordable or impressive to others. The condo had large windows, a small balcony, enough space for a home office. It was mine, entirely mine, purchased with money my grandmother left specifically so I could build a life that didn't require anyone's approval. I booked the Italy trip I dreamed about for years, 2 weeks in October, traveling solo through Tuscany and Rome. I planned the itinerary myself, choosing small towns and art museums and cooking classes, building a trip that reflected my interests rather than anyone else's preferences. Sarah commented that she'd never seen me so excited about something. I realized it was because I'd never allowed myself to want things this fully, to plan for pleasure rather than obligation. The trip planning became a form of meditation, a daily reminder that my life was mine to design. I learned basic Italian phrases, researched restaurants, marked galleries I wanted to visit. The anticipation was its own kind of joy, untainted by guilt or the need to justify the expense to anyone. Without the constant drain of family management, I found myself with energy for friendships I'd let languish. I reconnected with college friends, joined a book club, started attending a weekly yoga class where I actually talked to people rather than rushing in and out. So much of my social isolation had been self-imposed, a protection against letting people get close enough to see how dysfunctional my family was. Without that shame, I was more open, more present, more willing to be known. I went on a few casual dates, nothing serious yet, but the possibility of romance didn't feel as threatening as it once did. I was learning to trust that people might value me for who I was, not what I could provide, because I was finally valuing myself that way. 3 months into my new position, I closed a significant client deal that brought substantial revenue to Meridian Financial. Victoria took me to lunch to celebrate and offered me a partnership track, a path to equity ownership and leadership that would have been impossible at my previous firm. Eleanor, I don't know what changed for you in the past few months, but you're operating at a completely different level. You're confident, decisive, creative. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. I realized what had changed was simple. I'd stopped splitting my energy between my actual life and the exhausting performance of trying to earn my family's approval. Removing that drain didn't just free up time, it freed up my entire self. 4 months after our last communication, I received another email from Marcus. This one was different. No apologies, no requests, just an update. He was still working at the warehouse, had been promoted to a supervisory role, had paid off half his debt. He'd moved out of our parents' house into a small apartment with roommates. He mentioned casually that our parents barely spoke to him now that he wasn't following their script, that he was starting to understand what I'd experienced for years. The email ended with, "I don't expect you to respond. I just wanted you to know I'm trying to be someone you might actually want to know someday. No pressure. Just thought you should know." I did respond, briefly. "I'm proud of you, Marcus. Keep going." It wasn't reconciliation, not yet, but it was a door left slightly open, acknowledgement that growth was possible, that maybe someday we might build something real. The most surprising part of my new life was the absence of drama. Without my family's constant crises, my days were remarkably calm. I woke up without dread, made plans without having to build in contingency time for family emergencies, spent money without guilt, pursued opportunities without second-guessing whether I deserved them. This wasn't just the absence of challenges. It was the presence of alignment between my values and my choices. I wasn't living reactively anymore, wasn't managing other people's emotions, wasn't performing a version of myself designed to minimize conflict. I was just living. And the simplicity of it was revolutionary. On a Saturday morning in early fall, I was having coffee on my new condo's balcony, reading a book in the sunshine. My phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. The voice on the other end was my father's, and he sounded different, older, tired, less certain. "Eleanor, I know you said not to contact you, but I need to tell you something. Your mother is sick. It's serious. I thought you should know." The words hung in the air. I felt my carefully constructed peace waver. This was the test I knew would come eventually. The emergency that wasn't manufactured. The crisis that was real. I took a breath. "What do you mean, sick?" My father's response changed everything. "Cancer, stage 3. She starts treatment next week." I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar pull of obligation, of guilt, of the role I'd spent my life playing. But underneath it, I felt something else. The knowledge that I got to choose how I responded, that I wasn't obligated to light myself on fire to keep anyone else warm, that even now, even with this news, I could set boundaries that protected my peace. The question was, what would I choose? I sat on my balcony for an hour after my father's call, phone in hand, mind racing through possibilities and implications. I wasn't heartless. I wasn't immune to the news of my mother's illness. But I also wasn't willing to immediately abandon the boundaries that had given me my life back. I thought about what Sarah would say, what my therapist would say, what my grandmother would say. I thought about the difference between compassion and compliance, between supporting someone through illness and returning to a dynamic that diminished me. I realized that my response to this crisis would define whether my boundaries were real or performative, whether I'd actually changed or just been waiting for an excuse to return to the familiar patterns. I called Sarah, explained the situation, asked for honest perspective. Her response was characteristically direct. You can acknowledge that this is difficult for your family without making it your responsibility to fix. You can have compassion for your mother's illness without subjecting yourself to the toxicity that surrounded your relationship. The question isn't whether you're a good person if you don't rush back. You're already a good person. The question is, what kind of support, if any, you can offer without sacrificing your own well-being. The conversation helped me clarify my thinking. I wasn't obligated to become my mother's primary caregiver or emotional support. I wasn't required to pretend the past didn't happen because the present was difficult. But I could acknowledge the reality of the situation and offer support that didn't compromise my boundaries. I composed a careful email to my father. Dad, I'm sorry to hear about Mom's diagnosis. I know this must be incredibly difficult for the family. I want to be clear about what I can and can't do. I'm willing to receive updates about her treatment and prognosis. If there are specific concrete ways I can help that don't require me to resume our previous dynamic, I'm open to discussing them. What I'm not willing to do is return to a relationship where my boundaries aren't respected or where I'm expected to prioritize everyone else's needs above my own well-being. I hope you can understand that this isn't about punishment or revenge. It's about self-preservation. I genuinely wish Mom the best possible outcome with her treatment. Eleanor. I read it 3 times before sending, making sure the tone was compassionate but firm, clear but not cruel. The email represented my growth. I wasn't running back, but I wasn't completely closing the door either. I was maintaining my boundaries while acknowledging reality. My father's response came 2 days later, and it wasn't what I expected. Instead of anger or guilt tripping, Richard wrote something different. Eleanor, your email made me think about a lot of things I haven't wanted to face. Your mother and I have been talking, really talking, since her diagnosis, and some hard truths have come up. She admitted that she's always been harder on you than on Marcus, that she felt competitive with you in ways she never felt with him. She's asked me to tell you she's sorry, that she knows she hasn't been the mother you deserved. I don't know if this changes anything for you, and I'm not asking you to forgive us or come back. I just thought you should know that we're finally seeing what you tried to tell us. Whether we can change remains to be seen. I'll keep you updated on her treatment. Dad. I read the email multiple times, feeling a complicated mix of emotions. Not triumph that my parents finally acknowledged their behavior, not immediate forgiveness, but a kind of sad relief that they could finally see what I'd been experiencing. Their acknowledgement didn't erase the past, didn't undo the damage, didn't automatically repair the relationship, but it did remove the gaslighting, the denial, the insistence that my perception was wrong. I responded simply, "Thank you for telling me. I appreciate the honesty. I hope Mom's treatment goes well. I'm not ready for more than updates right now, but I'm glad we can at least communicate honestly." I sent it and felt something release. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but the possibility that someday, if my parents continued growing, there might be a different kind of relationship available. A week later, Marcus called. I almost didn't answer, but I did. His voice was shaky. "Elle, I know you said you wanted space from the family, but I needed to talk to someone who would understand. Mom's diagnosis has everyone freaking out, and I'm realizing how much I've avoided dealing with our family's actual dynamics. Being at the hospital, watching dad try to hold it together, seeing how mom's friends show up for her while we've all been so dysfunctional, it's making me see everything differently. We talked for an hour, the longest conversation we'd had in years, and it was honest in a way our relationship had never been. Marcus admitted he was jealous of my independence, that he resented me for leaving while he felt trapped. I admitted I resented his favored position, while understanding he was also damaged by our parents' dynamics. Just differently. The conversation didn't fix everything, but it opened a door to something real. 6 months after the trust meeting, my life had settled into a rhythm that felt authentically mine. I was thriving professionally. My condo was becoming a home. My friendships were deepening. I received monthly updates about my mother's treatment, which was progressing reasonably well. Marcus and I texted occasionally, building something tentative but genuine. I hadn't seen my parents, hadn't resumed family dinners or holidays, but I was no longer carrying the weight of their dysfunction. I realized that healing doesn't always look like reconciliation. Sometimes it looks like building a life so fulfilling that the past stops defining the present. In October, I took my Italy trip. I spent 2 weeks wandering through Tuscan hill towns, eating incredible food, visiting galleries, taking a cooking class in a villa outside Florence. I traveled solo, but wasn't lonely. I talked to other travelers, made temporary friends, enjoyed the freedom of making every decision based solely on what I wanted. On my last night in Rome, I sat at a cafe in Trastevere with a glass of wine and a view of the sunset. I thought about my grandmother and silently thanked her for the gift that made this possible. Not just the money, but the permission to live freely, to choose myself, to understand that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away from people who can't love you the way you deserve. As I watched the Roman sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink, I found myself feeling grateful for the journey that brought me here. Not the easy parts, but especially the hard parts. The choices that felt impossible but turned out to be necessary. I thought about everyone who's ever had to choose between family loyalty and self-preservation, and I hoped they'd find the courage to choose themselves, because that's where real peace begins. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt invisible in your own family, or questioned whether setting boundaries makes you selfish, know that you're not alone. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is build a life that doesn't require anyone's permission but your own. If you found strength in this journey, I'd be honored if you'd like and subscribe. Not for me, but as a reminder to yourself that your story matters too. I returned home from Italy with a new clarity about my life. I wasn't waiting for my family to change. I wasn't holding out hope for a fairy tale reconciliation. I was simply living, fully and freely, in a life I built from the ground up. When people asked about my family, I responded honestly but briefly. We're not close. It's complicated, but I'm at peace with it. And I was. I'd learned that you can love people from a distance, that you can wish them well without making their well-being your responsibility, that you can honor your own needs without being cruel. The trust fund was nearly gone, invested in my condo, my education, my experiences. But the real inheritance was something my grandmother knew money couldn't buy: the knowledge that I deserved better, the courage to demand it, and the wisdom to build it myself. 2 years after the trust meeting, I received a letter from my mother. Patricia was in remission, and the letter was different from any communication I'd received from her before. It wasn't defensive, wasn't manipulative, wasn't asking for anything. It was simply honest, an acknowledgement of failures, an expression of regret, and a quiet hope that someday, if I was willing, we might try to build something new. I read the letter in my home office, surrounded by the life I'd built, the career I loved, the space that was entirely mine, the peace I'd fought for and earned. I didn't respond immediately. I tucked the letter into a drawer and returned to my work, knowing that if reconciliation happened, it would be on my terms, in my time, and only if it served the life I'd created, rather than diminishing it. I'd learned the most important lesson my grandmother left me: that peace isn't something you find in other people's approval. It's something you build in the quiet certainty that you're worth protecting, that your life is worth living fully, and that the opinions of people who never saw you clearly don't get to define your worth. I'm 34 years old now, a partner at a thriving financial firm, owner of a home I love, and finally, completely at peace. Not because my family changed, but because I did. And that, I realized, is the only revenge that actually matters. Living so well that their rejection becomes irrelevant. Building a life so full that their absence creates no void. I'm free. And freedom, it turns out, was what I wanted all along.